Hello and welcome to another episode of On the Musical Road to Emmaus. I'm your host, Carol Traupman-Carr, and I'm so glad that you were walking with me today. Today we're joined by a man whose name you might not know, but many of you will recognize his music, regardless of what parish or denomination you attend. He has had an enormous influence on music in the modern Christian church. Lloyd Larson is a composer, arranger, pianist, and conductor with over 1,500 published works to his name. If you've sung in a choir at any time in the last 30 years, there's a good chance that you have held a piece of his music in your hands. Today, Lloyd and I are digging into his anthem, Morning Star, which my choir is singing throughout the season of Advent and which we will sing Christmas Eve. Whether you're a director, a singer, or someone who just loves the music of the church, I hope you'll enjoy this look behind the score. Lloyd called me from his home in Minnesota, and we jumped right into the conversation. No introductions, just like old friends.
My background is as a church musician. I mean, that was my sense of call, my mission in life. And the writing was just something that I, just kind of was interested in doing and I did it as a part of my own local ministry. I'm originally from downstate Illinois, but I served in churches in Indiana and Ohio and then eventually Minnesota. But while living in Columbus, Ohio and serving a church there, I got acquainted with Beckenhorst Press and John Beck while he was still living. And anyhow, he showed a sense of support and interest in what I was doing, and then just opened doors. And eventually I took a leap of most people think was my midlife crisis, I suppose, but and decided to try the writing full time, and that's what I've been doing now for over 30 years. So,
well, you've been very successful at. I was trying to think, is there any other piece other than Morning Star that my choir has sung by you? And we must have something, but it was too much to go through. It was like 1,500 pieces.
Well, I hope that's a good thing anyhow, for most. But yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunities and continue to provide open doors for me, and I keep plugging along. And my wife thinks I'm failing retirement, and she may be true about that. I relinquished my local church position and my editorial role with Loren basically in 2020 when COVID crisis hit all of us. And so, I've been kind of easing into the waters of retirement, but probably more successful at certain days than others. But there still is an interest, it seems, in what I do from a writing standpoint. And so I'm going to probably continue to do that for the foreseeable future anyhow. And finding a balance, and trying to ease into the waters of retirement with doing this. But, it's not like we're doing road construction or hanging out on roofs or cutting down trees or whatever, where our bodies simply can't continue to do what we've done for our entire career, really.
You were also a pianist, and you've done a lot of piano arrangements of hymns, can be used as preludes and meditation, things like that. Actually, are you still playing a lot?
Yeah, not as much as I was, but people think because you sit at a keyboard or a lot of days, writing music, that means you're practicing. Well, it's not. It's not the same. So my technique is not, what it was when I was in college or grad school or whatever. But yeah, I still play some in my church, but now I'm actually singing in the choir where I directed, for 25 years. And that's a good experience too. And so yeah, I continue to have opportunities so I play some in my church, or I do a number of weekends in various church settings over the course of any given year. And so I will wind up playing, not typically a concert, but I'll do an offertory, a prelude, or special kind of thing in those settings, in addition to being there as a guest conductor, which is more my gig, more my role these days in a conducting role, which it suits me well at this season of my life. So.
Was it easy to make that switch going from being the director to being another member of the choir?
Yeah, I mean, overall, I think it was. In fact, my wife and I debated about leaving this church simply so that we weren't in the way. But this is a place that's become a real important community to us. And the staff was very encouraging for us and very open to us staying here because of COVID and because we wound up taking a very backseat role, and it was a forced lower profile, which probably helped the transition for my successor.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a large parish, not a large church. I had served in large church settings when I was in full-time music ministry, but this is a smaller setting, and it has worked out very nicely for me to do my day job, which was my writing and editing, but yet to keep my hand involved in the local church setting, which I think really helps to temper and to guide and to inform my approach to writing for local churches like mine, like yours and others.
Mm-hmm.
That's a long answer to your short question. This individual has come in and made her unique and distinctive stamp on the music ministry, and that's the way it should be. She still does more Larson music than she probably should, probably because it's loaded in the library.
How does that feel when she pulls out a Larson piece and now you're on the opposite side?
It's all good. I get into a number of settings in any given year where somebody else has prepared, one of my pieces, and they will oftentimes take a little different interpretation, different tempo or different something, and I'm okay with that. Music, as you well know, is very subjective and open to interpretation. Not everybody's going to see eye to eye on that, and I'm okay with that.
You talked about how you were in graduate school, I think, when you just started to dabble a little bit with composing. What drew you into that, and how would you say that your approach to composition has evolved over the last few decades?
I was the guy who, if 2 years of theory were required, I took 3. If 1 year of orchestration was required, I took a second. Mainly because I'm wired that way. That was just something that appealed to me. And so, I began writing. Actually, it was even before I started grad school. I think I was in college when I had my first part-time church position in Indiana. One example comes to mind. I remember we had a brand new local band director. He had a master's degree in trumpet performance from Ball State University. He moved into our community and became the local high school band director. Mm-hmm. And he and his wife, who was a gifted musician with a music degree as well, landed our church. So I'm thinking, oh, man, I got this really fine trumpet player. And so I decided to do, arrange just something that I would accompany really kind of free-flowing vamping or improvising at the piano. Okay, 7th grade, 8th grade trumpet player that also wanted to play. Well, he didn't have nearly the skill level, so I wound up doing an arrangement that had some more embellished and developed lead lines for trumpet 1 and a lot of half notes, whole notes, and maybe a dotted quarter here or there, mm-hmm. For the 7th, 8th grade trumpet player. So that was kind of the way I went, in a very pragmatic kind of way, because I wasn't finding kinds of things I needed for my particular instrumental options in my local churches. Yeah, you wind up with these odd configurations. It wasn't your traditional brass quintet, mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. or sextet or septet. You just wound up doing some things that fit not only the configuration, but also the skill level of my local church musicians. And so that was really what I was doing a lot of, and honestly, most of it was instrumental initially because I could find enough choral things. It was the instrumental stuff that was hit and miss in terms of what was out there and available in the market, and plus finding it that fit my own particular instrumental configurations that I had available to me. And also I could match their skill level. And so I really cut my teeth in my local church settings, and even with some of my early choral things, and having that laboratory. And this is a church musician and an educator, having the laboratory experience of that was kind of how I really evolved as a writer, mm-hmm. was really finding out what worked and what didn't work with real live musicians.
Yes.
My background is piano, as you know. I played a little guitar, and I was a singer. In fact, I went to college not knowing if I was going to major in piano or major in singing, because in high school, there was always a girl who could be the accompanist. There was always a shortage of guy singers. I never was given the opportunity to even consider accompanying because I was a guy who sang.
Well, that hasn't changed. Did that. We're still looking for the tenors and basses, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Whether you're talking about school or whether you're talking about church, it's the same kind of thing. But anyway, I think my writing, if you've looked at any of my music over the years, including Morning Star, I try to write for the volunteer church musician. Made it kind of my life mission, which I think is a continuation of my sense of my life's mission. Even when I was a college student preparing to go into church music, I simply said, I want to write this in such a way that the volunteer church choral musician, and oftentimes directors are volunteers or with limited skills. Sometimes your most gifted musician in a local church setting is the person sitting at the piano accompanying your choir.
Yeah.
And so I simply, that has shaped, it has informed my approach to the way I write and what I write.
Yeah, I do want to get to Morning Star, but before that, so I appreciate that you're writing accessible music for volunteer choirs. I'm curious, though, what you're looking for as a composer or doing arrangements. What is it that you want the people in the pews to hear or to feel when they are hearing your music?
I have participated in a number of composer symposiums over the year, where you're talking to budding writers and that kind of thing. And also in weekend situations where I'm in a local church setting as a guest or even in my own church over the years. And I remind people, I say, we can be enamored with wonderful melodies, but we have to remember in the context of the local church setting, the reason we write, the reason we sing is for text. Mm-hmm. So if the text is not coming across, if the text is not communicated, if we as singers don't embrace, hear, or understand the text, and it's especially important, I think, for those of us who sing in the liturgical, in the church, in the sacred settings, that we have to embrace the text. And I spend time talking about text. Great vowels, uniform vowels, is what we focus on to create good and wonderful sounding choral singing. But if we don't get the consonants right, people don't understand text, and then we've short-circuited our mission, our primary goal, which is to convey message and theological truths through the words we sing, because we give attention to consonants in what we sing.
It's very Martin Luther of you. Martin Luther, as you might know, was one of the reasons that he had issues with the Catholic Church back in the Renaissance, was the fact that the music had gotten so complicated and elaborate that no one could understand it, and then add to that they were singing in a language that wasn't native to the people who were sitting there. So yes, I think you're right that making sure it comes through, and then you really have to adjust. The acoustics of the church impact how hard those consonants need to be. Otherwise, you just get this kind of gobbledygook of one vowel after another, and it's a beautiful sound, but you're not sure what's going on. So I appreciate that.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And you in your Catholic tradition, experienced some of this too. Before Vatican II, where you basically doing your masses with the focus in Latin and all.
Yes. And there's a big move to bring back the traditional Latin Mass, and I kind of like that for maintaining some connection to tradition.
Sure.
But not as a regular part of Sundays, because I do think it separates the congregation from everyone else who's there.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, and being in church, whatever your denomination is a community thing. It's a community worship, community prayer. It's being in community. It's celebrating with each other.
No, I hear you. And I like the connection to history. I like that is important to us. And I like that we can talk about it and perhaps help to connect the dots for our people.
Yes.
But yet, Martin Luther also, he helped us to understand the importance of relating to our context, our community.
Yes.
Even his use of the folk and the bar songs of the day, in terms of what he did, helped to connect the dots between faith and those who maybe came at life from a non-faith perspective.
Yes. It's however you can make that connection with the text, with the music, whatever it is that ends up drawing people in. Let's get to Morning Star.
Okay.
This is, I think, very accessible for the singers. I think the hardest part when we first read it through was It's in this nice, smooth 3/4, and then occasionally you have measures of 4/4. When you're sight reading for a volunteer choir, they stumble over that. But that's to keep the text fitting. I think you were trying not to force a certain number of syllables into this 3/4. There's nothing that says you have to stay in 3/4.
Yeah, all right.
And
no, I mean that's usually the motivation. You hope it feels organic and not contrived when you make those kind of little switches. But that's a part of it. I think there's more of those, if I'm not mistaken. I think I do more of that probably in the actual piece Morning Star than maybe even in some of the other places. Although it's not uncommon for me to use that in my writing style from time to time, for sure.
Sometimes when it's forced to stay with the meter, you end up with accents on the wrong syllable, and that doesn't feel right. I think one of the beautiful things about this piece too is the piano part is also, it's fairly easy to play. You don't need to be a piano major to play it. You have to have some skill, but the piano part is very, very lovely, and it is the continuity as we have those metrical changes, except for the one place where the piano drops out. But I love that moment where the piano drops out.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it allows the choir to stand on their own for just a short, brief time. I'm a person who likes to practice a good bit a cappella with my choirs, but oftentimes in the church setting, it becomes a little bit dicey, a little risky to give an extended or challenging section where the choir is singing unaccompanied. They feel pretty transparent and vulnerable in those moments.
It's only 4 measures, but it's 4 beautiful measures. One of the things that I really like about this piece is, of course, the Morning Star reference. To me, yes, I know it's biblical, but Morning Star is an important image and reference in the Moravian tradition.
Yeah, I bet it is. Yeah,
and there's a famous Moravian hymn called Morning Star that's part of Christmas Eve celebrations and Vespers services all the time around Christmas. So I think that's why I first stopped on the piece, but. It's a piece that it fits in Advent because we're talking about the coming birth of Emmanuel. But there's also, in my opinion, really, really clear references to the crucifixion and resurrection. And I do see connections between the Advent season and the Lenten season, but they're really explicit here in a way that I think is actually gorgeous. You talk about the shroud of Silent Night. We think about the shroud of Turin and the shroud that was over Jesus. The burst of glory bright is the star that the shepherds see and the wise men see, but it's also the resurrection and that set us free from sin's dark power. Christ isn't really doing that when he's an infant, but his arrival on this earth is all about that. And so I'd love to know sort of some of the things that you were thinking as you were putting this together. And if I'm off the mark, please correct me. It's your piece, not mine.
No, I think I think everything points, from the Old Testament, the anticipation of the birth of Emmanuel, the promised Messiah, and then as we get into the Gospels, everything foreshadows or foretells of what is to come, which is bleak and dark days when we get to the final days of Jesus' earthly life and ministry.
Yes.
But yet it's the anticipation, even beyond that, of the hope, the promise that is there both in the prophetic words of the Old Testament, but also as Jesus himself, talked about the forthcoming, his colleagues, his friends, his disciples didn't fully embrace or understand what he was talking about and all that, but yet so much of what he shared was foretelling what was yet to come. And there were going to be some tough times, some tough days, and yet the promise of the resurrection, which they did not fully embrace up until it actually happened.
Right.
And even in that moment, it took a little convincing of Thomas and others, to fully embrace what had transpired. And then my sense of it is it all began to make sense. But I think if you can include some of this sense of hope, eternal hope, even in the midst of anticipating anguish and deep, dark days, which accompanied the crucifixion. I think there's a lot of subtle kinds of imagery, subtle kinds of messages that are inherent in the lyrics. And I think Susan Boersma's lyric in Morning Star in particular covers a good bit of that. You know, free us from sin's dark power, banish the shadows of the night, shatter the darkness with your light, Emmanuel. You know, all of that is just a foretelling of what is to come in the promise of the resurrection following the crucifixion. So yeah, I'm glad you kind of picked up on some of that, because I think oftentimes in the Christmas message, which I love and I want to celebrate.
Yes.
But sometimes we're so focused on the moment of what's here right now that we don't look beyond to what is to come. And as I oftentimes say to choirs that I work with, or the choirs that I am with, if we don't have Holy Week, if we don't have the Passion story, if we don't have the crucifixion, if we don't have the resurrection, we don't have a gospel.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have the foundational cornerstones of our faith, which is what's there.
Yeah, it's almost like it's another birthday story.
Yeah.
If we even learn about it without all the rest of that, right?
Yep.
So I'm curious about some of the musical settings. I know you have this coming from the poem, banish shadows of the night, shatter darkness with your light, Emmanuel. They're very subtle and quiet passages. Can you tell me a little bit about your musical choices there?
You know, one of the things you said here a moment ago, which is important to me also, is making sure when you create a melodic line that you do something which doesn't wind up with wrong syllables on wrong beats, strong syllables on weaker beats. I mean, there are cases where you do that intentionally, but ordinarily that certainly is a goal. I don't know that I can give you shed any great light on some of the rationale and thinking here on some of this. One of the things I've learned over the years in doing multiple extended works for Advent and Christmas is that melodies have to be frequent and ready present in an extended work. You just have to have, I think, important melodic lines, lines that are recognizable, melody from familiar carols or familiar chorales or historic music, which in some way ties into the soundtrack of our Advent and Christmas seasons. And so that's one of the reasons you'll find throughout here familiar melodies. Melodies that we may or may not sing, but they become underscore, either in a case of where this can be accompanied strictly by a piano, or if instruments are added, but they are recognizable to those who may not sing in the choir, or who will come and hear them in a worship concert setting one time, but yet they can walk away saying, oh, I knew that melody. I recognize that. And so that becomes a part of the cohesive material that creates this tapestry of familiar sounds in the midst of telling a familiar story, but hopefully in a fresh and rather distinctive way. I don't know if that necessarily answers your question, Carol, but it perhaps sheds a little insight into some of my thinking on this.
Yeah, there's nothing in this that sounded familiar to me, or that I recognized from, oh, that was Silent Night or whatever in the past. But the repetition of certain phrases, shatter darkness with your light, Emmanuel. It's so simple. It's pentatonic. We know that the pentatonic melodies are where we start in teaching music to young children because they are so easy to learn. It's only in two parts, and you strip away some of the accompaniment, and you have it at mezzo piano or piano. And so to me, it's almost like you really want people to kind of listen carefully to that, because ultimately that's why our Lord Jesus Christ is coming to this earth. The more bombastic parts are happening around that. Yeah,
no, I think you're exactly right. That is a part of the goal. I think, especially on that we're talking about on Morning Star itself, that song. Yeah, there's a lot of transparency. There's a lot of thin texture. And that's really by design to really help the message to come through. These were bleak times for those who were anticipating the Messiah and the fulfillment then brought the opportunity for it to be more developed and more filled out in terms of sound and all of that, which happens later on in the work.
I want to start to wrap up here, and I have a couple of wrap-up questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
You've been in the music business, in the sacred music business, for a very long time as a performer, as a pianist, as an accompanist, arranger. You've done a lot of arrangements. The church music has changed a lot over the years, and I'm wondering what gives you the most hope for the future of choral music and worship music in the coming generations?
Yeah, those are good questions and challenging questions for all of us. I believe there will always be a place for choral music in the life of the church. I pray that's the case. I think it is a way that we can meaningfully and expressively communicate the truths of our faith. I'm not anti some of the contemporary kinds of things that I see happening in various churches. It bothers me when I hear of churches saying, we are either going to be this or we are going to be that. And I want to go back and say, why can't we be all of that? Why can't we, as the Apostle Paul mentions a couple of times in his epistles, he encouraged the church leaders to use psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs to teach or to admonish or to direct, to help people come to grips with their faith. Now, I'll let the theologians figure out exactly what all that means, but as a church musician, my thinking is that's an invitation, a call to be pretty eclectic in terms of the approach that we take with music in our local church settings. And so that's one of the reasons that I, historically over the years in my own local churches and the church where I am now, and we have made a fundamental commitment over the years to be pretty eclectic, to be inclusive in terms of our approach. And we will use anything from a great classic work to something that's pretty contemporary, or a gospel in style, or an African-American spiritual, or whatever. And I think leadership is key in the local churches, not only pastoral leadership, but music ministry leadership, for us to continue to find success and programs to have strength and solidarity moving forward. It's going to depend upon leadership. It bothers me at times when churches simply say, we're going to do away with the choral kind of component to what we have done historically over the years. We just don't think it has an attraction to the masses or to the people that might come, or oftentimes it's simply they don't have somebody at their disposal who brings that kind of skill and expertise that can actually guide such a program. I'd like to encourage churches, and I'd like to encourage individuals that have a musical background to develop that skill. We can do so much in the local church settings with choral groups that you cannot do with the select ensemble of praise and worship singers. 3 or 4 people that may not be able to read a note, but they can learn it by simply listening. And I just think that the choral setting has been a place it's become kind of a small family. It's a small group in our local churches. It's a place where we can share our joys and share our griefs and share our struggles. It's the place where the 90-year-old can stand next to the 23-year-old and sing in a meaningful kind of way and have a connection that you don't get in very many other settings.
Well, I'll tell you, for Christmas Eve, we're starting our musical prelude with Victoria's O Magnum Mysterium. And then the next piece is Morning Star by Lloyd Larson. That's a pretty strong juxtaposition there. So.
It is, but I'm honored to be included.
One final question. You said your wife said that you're failing retirement because you're still writing and playing, but is there, and I said, you've been incredibly prolific throughout your career, over 1,500 published works. What's on your bucket list? What is a musical project that maybe you haven't yet tackled, or a musical stone that you've left unturned?
Well, that's a hard thing to say. There are times that I would like to dabble in a more extended work that wasn't just Advent, Christmas, or Holy Week, Easter. And this is where the rubber meets the road in terms of those of us trying to make a living, or in my retirement, supplement a living with other projects. Over the years, I probably have done, maybe 3 or 4 extended works that, that weren't seasonally related. But the publishers, they love if you can come up with something, but it has to sell. Right. And so this year I was invited to do a project that we premiered at Carnegie Hall on the life of John Newton. This is the 300th anniversary of John Newton's birth, the author of the lyric for Amazing Grace, among other hymns. And so that was a welcome invitation to me to kind of move outside of just the world of these larger extended works. So you didn't ask specifically about extended works, but that's the kind of thing that I welcome the opportunity to do on occasion. But those happen rarely, simply because the publishers have a lot invested when they talk about a large work that maybe is fully orchestrated and all that kind of thing. And so they want to have some sense of assurance that there's going to be some traction from the general audience to purchase and help offset the expenses that they have invested in a project like that. But I guess I go from season to season and project to project. I know that people look to me for piano settings that they can use in their parish and their local church settings, extended choral works. I continue to be asked to do those on a regular basis, and I'm grateful for that. And so my goal, I guess, on a regular basis is to find a fresh way to say the familiar. I oftentimes parallel it to a pastor. A pastor comes back every year needing to approach his Advent or his Lenten journey with the major cornerstones. They're still there, but to find a fresh take, a fresh interpretation of how we look at Advent, of how we look at the Passion story. And so that's one of the goals that I have on a regular basis when I'm approaching this. But having the opportunity occasionally to reach into new territory, I think it's healthy for me from a theological standpoint, from a musical standpoint, but yet it also, I recognize it has to be pragmatic from a sense that the people like your location and like my location can come and say, hey, we can do this with our group. And so finding that balance is always going to be part of the assignment and part of the challenge, I think.
Well, we love Morning Star. I'm looking forward to looking for more Lloyd Larson. I have really enjoyed this conversation. I so appreciate your taking the time.
Thank you, Carol. And I've enjoyed it as well. And hopefully our paths will cross in person someday down the road.
What a wonderful conversation. This is your host, Carol Traupman-Carr, signing off on another episode of On the Musical Road to Emmaus.